Today we are going to create this cool toggle dark mode, light mode effect together in HTML and CSS. In case you want to use the exact same images, there will be a link to my GitHub repository in the description, so you can go there, go to the images folder, and you will have all of the images in there. And for this tutorial we use day 2 and night 2. On top of our HTML file we've linked our CSS file, and we only will need one line of code inside of our body in HTML. So we will create an input of type checkbox, and we will give this input an ID of day minus night. Now we'll copy this day minus night ID and we'll go inside of CSS to style everything. But first of all, we need to define a couple of things by using :root, and right here we want to define our variables. First of all, we will define for our color scheme, we are going to use light, dark, and we will define a variable dash dash toggle minus bg, and we will set this toggle minus bg variable initially to an URL, and we say this URL points to our images folder, and as I said initially we want to use day2.jpg. So we'll say images/day2.jpg, we'll save the file, and now we will start to style our body. So right here we can say we want to have a width of 100%, height of 100 viewport height, or let's say a min minus height of 100 viewport height, so it fills out at least the entire viewport. And now there comes the interesting part where you can say background, and by defining this color scheme you can now say light minus dark, and you can define two values inside of this function basically. The first value is for the light scheme or for the light mode, and the second color is for the dark mode. So now you can, for example, say for the body we want to use a background color that is equal to this background color, so we just copy this in as a first value, and for the dark mode we want to use this background color right here as a second color. And as you can see, now we changed this body background color to this color since we're using light mode by default. Now we can also say let's use display of flex, justify content of center, align items of center to just center our item to see it a little bit better. Next up, let's start to style this checkbox, and we have copied, or we are going to copy this ID right here. Now we are going to say hashtag day minus night. We will say appearance is none, because by default we have to remove the default appearance of our body, and as you can see now it disappeared. Now let's also say dash webkit minus appearance is none, and dash moss minus appearance is none. By doing so, we just enforced that this works in every single browser. So now, next up, let's say we have a width of maybe 225 pixels, a height of 100 pixels, and now we want to set our background, and our background is equal to this toggle background variable. So we'll say dash dash toggle background, and now when we have our default background, we will have this image basically, and once we change to dark mode, we will change this background variable image. So now let's say we have a border minus radius of 50 pixels, and we already have the image. You just can't see the image because the image is way too big. So we have to say that background minus size is equal to cover. So this covers the entire background. We can also add a cursor of pointer by doing so. And now let's also use box minus shadow. Let's say we want to inset the shadow. We want to have 5 pixels offset X, 5 pixels offset Y, 15 pixels blur, and RGBA of 0, 0, 0, and let's probably use 0.6. So now we get this cool effect. Now I think it's time to add a circle right here that indicates whether the button is checked or not. So let's say hashtag day minus night, : after, so we will create an after element in order to do so. We will say that this one has a content that is basically an empty string, a display of block. We want to have a width of 90 pixels and a height of 90 pixels. Why do we use 90 pixels? Our height is 100 pixels, so if we take up 90 pixels of 100 pixels, we basically have some space to the top and to the bottom, and that's exactly what we need. So we will also say now we have a background of white. We will have a border minus radius of 50%, so this is a circle right now. And now we need to align this circle. So let's say our day night, which is the parent for this day night after element, will have a position of relative. So we can use position absolute to position this element, our after element, basically relative to the container, which is day night. So we'll say left 5 pixels of gap, top 5 pixels of gap, and as you can see now it's aligned perfectly fine, because obviously if this takes up 90 pixels of 100 pixels, we can basically use 5 pixels to the top and 5 pixels to the bottom. Now let's also use a box minus shadow of inset again, and we can just copy this line right here, I think. And whoops, let's just replace this. And let's say we are going to remove these 5 pixels. Those 5 pixels, let's use probably 25 pixels for the blur. And let's use maybe 0.2 or 0.3 for the shadow strength. Also, I would actually prefer to use a predefined color for our button. So we will replace white with this color that I've basically prepared. So now this button looks pretty cool in my opinion. Now we also want to add a hover state to our after element. So once we hover, I basically would like to get a certain offset to the left. So let's say hashtag day minus night colon hover colon after. So we will hover or define a hover state for our after element. And now let's say left is maybe 15 pixels. So we'll add 10 pixels to the left. And now we can also add a transition. So let's say transition all 0.5 seconds and let's use ease. And now we get this cool effect. Now we also want to define a state for the checked version basically. So what we can do is we can say hashtag day minus night colon checked colon after. And right here we can basically say that we want to have a background. And this background should be equal to the color that we've defined right on top right here. So colors toggle, we take this color for the background. We paste this in here, and as you can see, once I check the checkbox, this color basically turns to this purple color. I also want to have a box shadow for this color, so I'm going to say the box shadow is just a little bit stronger, so maybe 0.6. Now we get this effect, and now we also want to move it to the right. So let's say left has an offset of maybe we have 90 pixels in total. The width is 225 pixels. So maybe if we move this by 125 pixels to the right, or let's say 130, so we get an offset of exactly 95 pixels, so it should be perfectly aligned. Obviously, once our check button is checked, we also want to change this day-night background. So in order to do so, we can now say, in fact, we can also just remove this toggle background variable because we don't really need it. So we can just replace this with this URL. Let's remove this one right here. And now we can just copy the same URL and use this URL for our background that we define for the checked version. So let's say hashtag day minus night colon checked. So this defines the checked state. And once this checkbox is checked, we'll define a background that is equal to night. So let's say dash night 1, or let's use night 2, like so. Now, obviously this background is way too big. So what we can do in order to fix this is again say background minus size is equal to cover. So now this covers the entire available space. And as you can see, now this works. It would also be pretty nice to get a transition for our background. So what we can do is we can say transition all 0.5 seconds ease. So now we get this ease effect between those backgrounds. And as you can see, this already looks pretty nice in my opinion. And all we really have to change is basically the color scheme right here. So now we have to say colon root colon has. So if the root element, so if this one has a hashtag day minus night element that is checked, we want to define a different style for our color scheme. So we'll say color minus scheme now is dark. So now we say once we have day night button that is checked, we want to change to color scheme dark. And as you can see, now we get this effect basically, which is pretty smooth and looks pretty good in my opinion.